Welcome to True Stuff Tuesdays. My name is Elizabeth Rusch, and I am the author of You Call This Democracy: How to Fix Our Government and Deliver Power to the People. So I'm going to mostly read aloud from my book. I'm going to read the introduction and the first chapter, and I hope you enjoy it. You can always learn more at elizabethrusch.com. I also have a special website for this book called it's youcallthis.com, and on it I have discussion questions and information about how your state fares in all the issues that I raise in this book. So I hope you enjoy. Americans are taught that we live in a democracy, but is that really true? More than 200 years ago, a group of people met in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, with an ambitious goal: to create a government more perfect than any other seen on earth. We the people, in order to form a more perfect union, they wrote. The founders of the United States of America started us on a path to democracy. The United States is a representative democracy where the people rule by regularly electing representatives who make the laws that govern us all. But how democratic is our government really? And how well is it working? Americans enjoy great freedoms: freedom of the press, freedom of speech, freedom to gather with fellow citizens, freedom to practice the religion of our choosing, freedom to protest when the government does not work as we think it should. But people have begun to suspect that something is not quite right with our democracy, and they may be right. Public trust in government is dangerously low, according to surveys by the Pew Research Center. Only 1 in 5 Americans trust the federal government to do what is right most of the time. This distrust crosses party lines, with only 28% of Republicans and 15% of Democrats reporting confidence. These misgivings span racial, gender, and ethnic groupings, as well as generations. When asked to compare our political system to those in similar countries, only a quarter of Americans rate it above average, and only 15% consider it the best in the world. Much of this dissatisfaction comes from our government's failure to address the challenges people face. Millions struggle to pay for the most expensive health care in the world. Many skip medical care or prescriptions they desperately need. 40% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, unable to cover an emergency expense of just $400. About 40 million Americans live in poverty, including 15 million children. Wildfires rage, droughts destroy farms, cities and towns are inundated with floodwaters. Little is being done to stop global climate change, even though a record number of Americans, 80%, think that something should be done about it. And these are just a few of the important issues our country struggles to address. Many American citizens are tired of gridlock and the partisan divisions splitting our country. But maybe the problem is not we the people. Maybe the problem is that our democracy is not living up to its promise. When we don't feel heard or represented by our government, when the laws passed don't seem to help our country, we get angry at each other. But perhaps we need to direct some of that anger and energy toward the structures of our democracy. Perhaps our government is failing us because of fundamental flaws in the system. A basic principle of representative democracy is one person, one vote. Each citizen has an equal say in electing representatives and thus influencing the laws of the land. No one's vote should mean more than anyone else's. No one should be able to buy power. The weight of your vote shouldn't depend on whether you are rich or poor, live in a particular state or urban or rural area, or are a member of a particular political party. You shouldn't need to be a certain race or gender or religion to have a say about how our country works. The vote of each citizen should be equal. Just how far has our democracy veered from that ideal? You've probably heard of the Electoral College, but you may not realize that this strange process actually takes a very important decision, who gets to be president, out of the hands of the people. You may know some of the differences between the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate, but you may not be aware that the Senate gives more power to people who live in small states. You may have heard of congressional districts, but you might be surprised to learn that when legislators redraw district borders, they can deliberately shift power to some voters and away from others. This book examines issues such as these to explore several questions. How does our democracy live up to the principle of one person, one vote? Is political power equally accessible to all citizens? What would it take to build a more perfect union? This is not a civics textbook, though I hope readers will take away a deeper understanding of our government. It is not a political history of the United States, though some historical context will be given. It is also not a partisan plea designed to get readers to support one party or issue, though parties and issues may be mentioned in examples. Instead, this book tackles how our democracy really functions today, who really has power and why, and how that influences politicians and policies. It's my hope that this book unifies all people around the promise of democracy, that it gives an honest view of how our democracy really works, what is wrong, and what we can do together to fix it. The hard truth, recognized by scholars, politicians, journalists, and public servants of all political persuasions, is that our system is rigged against ordinary Americans. We cannot fix the issues that matter to us until we fix the system. Whether you care about safe streets, a fair and effective criminal justice system, immigration reform, the environment, the military, gay rights, the right to bear arms, or the right to prevent gun violence, whether you worry about wages, the cost of college, or our broken healthcare system, whether you are more concerned about clean air and water or the small business tax burden, you need to pay attention to how decisions are really made. For our democracy to work effectively on any issue, it must be responsive to the will of the people. I admit, working on this book often made me angry, even outraged, when I saw clearly how some aspects of our democracy hurt fellow citizens. But my research has made me hopeful too. Countless people, young and old, are already working to form a more perfect union. Inspired by their work, this book is ultimately a book of solutions. After revealing flaws in our democracy, each chapter shows how we can address them and offers a bounty of organizations, websites, and other resources to get started. Change is in our reach. Our country is ready for reform. Roughly 2/3 of Americans think significant changes need to be made to the design and structure of our government, according to a 2018 Pew poll. Citizen campaigns for reform in Michigan, Florida, North Dakota, and other places around the country have proven that the power of the people can beat the power of money, the power of habit, and the power of party politics. As anthropologist Margaret Mead said, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. So in this book, I address issues like the Electoral College, gerrymandering, the role of money in politics. I talk about voter suppression, our horrible low voter turnout in the United States, and a number of other issues. But I want to read a really fun chapter called Too Young to Vote. Here's just a picture of it. In this, I talk about the youth vote, and when I was writing the book, I learned a ton about young people, and I hope that some young people are tuning in to this live reading. And I thought that you might be interested in this chapter about the possibility of lowering the voting age to 16 years old. I'm just going to check the time. Yep, we're doing well. Okay. On Election Day in November 2013, Tacoma Park, Maryland made history. It became the first city in the United States to lower the voting age for local elections to 16. Lear High School junior Ben Miller, who worked part-time at a gelato store and played in a rock band, was the first voter under 18 to register. Alana Nadesan became the first person in the United States under 18 to cast a ballot. Quote, "I think it's important that we all do our part to show our government that we care," she says. "We want our government to represent us." In 2015, young people in Greenbelt, Maryland took up the idea. When citizens there were first asked if they supported lowering the voting age for city elections from 18 to 16, a whopping 77% opposed it. Over the next couple of years, teens created videos describing their involvement in the community and what voting would mean to them. They attended rallies for city council members and brought the issue up in meetings and debates. They testified on local issues that mattered to them. They submitted letters to the editor of local newspapers. They created brochures and knocked on doors. When talking to the public, 17-year-old Julia Sharapi of Greenbelt's Youth Advisory Committee got some pushback. People told her, you're all right, but my grandkids are irresponsible. But she didn't give up. Quote, "It's hard when you're told that people our age are disrespectful and responsible, but we kept moving forward," she says. Emma Smith, also 17 at the time, faced the same resistance at first. "If you explain the reasoning behind lowering the age, people will often change their mind," she says. And they did. In 2017, 54% of voters supported the effort, and it passed. Currently, there are 8 million citizens aged 16 to 17 in the United States. These younger citizens can hold jobs, get married, pay taxes, but they have no say in electing the people who will make decisions that influence all aspects of their lives, including the quality and safety of their high schools and colleges, their healthcare options and tax burden, and the wars that they may one day be called on to fight. What would our democracy look like if they were granted the right to vote? 16 and 17-year-olds are already voting in 3 cities in Maryland and 1 in California. Efforts have been afoot in Fairfax, Richmond, Fresno, Sacramento, San Francisco, California, Broward County, Florida, Shelburne and Ashfield, Massachusetts, Bridgeton, New Jersey, and in Washington, D.C., Illinois, Colorado, New York, and Texas. In fact, attempts to lower the voting age to 16 have been launched in almost half of states. So, do teenagers deserve a say? Teenagers hold down jobs, run businesses, juggle education while supporting families, and contribute to the community in record numbers. Teen civic engagement is impressive. Almost 16 million young people volunteer in the community, with high schoolers the most likely of all age populations to volunteer. Many teens play adult roles in their families. For instance, millions of young people in immigrant families act as translators for first-generation parents who speak little or no English. Almost 1.5 million of young people are responsible for caring for sick family members, feeding them, administering medications, and accompanying them to doctor's appointments and therapy. On any given day, 30% of teens who have younger siblings are responsible for them. Many support themselves and their families financially. Roughly 2 million 16 and 17-year-olds held down jobs in 2017, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. 1/3 of working youth contribute more than 20% to the total income of their households. And 1 out of every 10 working youths is responsible for more than half of their household's income. People under age 18 pay taxes too, to the tune of $700 million a year. Without the vote, this is taxation without representation, one of the core reasons our nation declared independence from Great Britain. One of the great features of democracy is that politicians have to be responsible to people who have a say at the polls. Quote, "From a public official's point of view," says Kate Stewart, who was elected mayor after Tacoma Park lowered the voting age, "it makes you pay attention a lot more to issues that are important to 16 and 17-year-olds. So, are young people competent to vote? One argument against lowering the voting age is that 16 and 17-year-olds aren't competent to make informed choices during an election. Research contradicts this claim. Recent advances in brain and developmental research have uncovered interesting differences between two kinds of decision-making. Decision-making when emotional, tired, in a group, under pressure from others, or in a hurry is called hot cognition. Decision-making in a calm situation when there is ample time to think and consider the facts is considered cold cognition. Lawrence Steinberg, professor of psychology at Temple University and one of the leading experts on adolescence, notes that while it may be true that 16-year-olds are not at their best making decisions when tired, stressed, or in a group of other teens, hot cognition, 16-year-old brains are fully developed to handle calm, reasoned decision-making. 16-year-olds have as much capacity as adults to gather and consider facts and information, weigh pros and cons, and logically analyze ideas in situations when they have enough time, he says. Do young people have enough political knowledge? Another argument against lowering the voting age is that teens lack political maturity or knowledge. This is a familiar argument, as it was used for decades to bar Black people and women from voting. The political knowledge of different populations has been studied closely. Assessments out of Rutgers University suggest that 16 and 17-year-olds are just as informed, know as much about government, and pay attention to the news with similar frequency as 18 to 25-year-olds who currently have the right to vote. Quote, "If you look at the kind of preparation that adolescents have to vote in terms of their understanding of issues, what they understand about civic life, their levels of participation in public life, they are not different from those we have seen in 18 and 19-year-olds, says researcher Daniel Hart, professor of childhood studies and psychology at Rutgers. There is really no good reason to allow 18-year-olds to vote and exclude 16-year-olds, he says. If anything, political engagement among teens is on the rise. Thousands start and run political groups at school. They debate current and constitutional issues in competitions and on social media. They organize and participate in protests. After a mass shooting took place at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in February 2018, students in Parkland, Florida marshaled hundreds of thousands of people to rally to end gun violence in the March for Our Lives protests all across the country. Quote, "It's time for us to stand up and take action and hold our elected officials responsible," said David Hogg, who was a senior at the time of the shooting. Teens also rallied counter-protests in support of the Second Amendment. Teens have shown up in impressive numbers in Black Lives Matter marches, pro-choice and pro-life rallies, the March for Science, the Women's March, and other national and local protests. Young people are engaged with our government in many ways, including testifying in front of state legislatures and the U.S. Congress. James Jalen, 16, a junior at the Maine School of Science and Mathematics, testified before the Maine state legislature on a bill he initiated on child support payments. Teenager Diego Morris of Phoenix testified before Congress about health care and the importance of allowing access to promising new treatments. Young people already participate in elections too. They knock on doors for candidates. They contribute to candidates' campaigns. That means that teens can contribute thousands of dollars to support a candidate, but they can't support them with a vote. 16 and 17-year-olds have even stepped up to become candidates who can't cast a vote for themselves. In 2018, a half dozen Kansas teens joined the run for governor. 17-year-old Tyler Rusch, a Republican, says that, quote, old man principles, like those held by currently elected officials, aren't working for the country. He also pointed out that our founders envisioned the United States as a land where citizens his age could hold positions of responsibility and authority. Quote, lots of people ask me, what can you do for people my age, he said. In Alexander Hamilton's time, someone my age could be commander of a frigate. These and many other teens want to be more engaged in democracy. Quote, they don't want to just protest and advocate, they want to vote, says Julieta Hernandez, a high school senior from Sacramento, California, who has been working to lower the voting age. Quote, we see it as another step to accomplish what they want to see in the government. So, would teens just copy their parents? Some people worry that 16 and 17-year-olds will just vote the same way their parents do. But independent thinking is a hallmark of this stage of life, says researcher Daniel Hart of Rutgers. A good example is Sarah Leonard, who has been voting in Hyattsville, Maryland since she was 16. While deciding where to cast her vote, she never asked which candidates her parents were supporting. She researched the issues and candidates for herself. Quote, I'm forming my own political views from what I'm learning, she says. Concerns that young people will support only one party are also unfounded, research suggests. Young people are not yet loyal to one party, according to research by Peter Levine, a professor of citizenship and public affairs at Tufts University. Maybe that's why roughly half of millennials identify as politically independent, according to a 2014 survey by the Pew Research Center. Would teens just copy their friends? What if teens just vote the way their friends vote? Well, that would be no different from the voting patterns we see among adults, according to Betsy Sinclair, Associate Professor of Political Science at Washington University in St. Louis, and author of The Social Citizen, Peer Networks and Political Behavior. Humans are social animals. Voters enter the voting booth with ideas, priorities, and convictions that are often shaped by family members, friends, neighbors, and coworkers. But one feature of our democracy is that voters make their final choices alone, in a private voting booth or by filling out a private ballot. Democracy allows all voters to use whatever information they want to make a decision. Should that courtesy extend to 16 and 17-year-olds as well? Perhaps the most important reason to lower the voting age. Younger voting could be great for our democracy. We face a real problem in this country with voter turnout, with much lower engagement in elections than other established democracies. Offering the vote for the first time at the age of 18 may be a big part of the problem. Many 18-year-olds are leaving home for the first time to attend college, join the military, or set up their own households. So at a time of major life transition, when adapting to new places and new experiences, people are expected to be successful first-time voters. They have to remember to register to vote in a new place or register in their hometown and request an absentee ballot. Then they need to mail in the absentee ballot or get to the polls on Election Day. It's no wonder that voter turnout in the United States among young adults is among the lowest in the world. Only about 40% of these eligible voters turn out for presidential elections, with even less, just 20 to 30% voting in midterm or local elections. Quote, it could be that 18 is quite a bad year to be the first year to be eligible to vote, says Peter Levine of Tufts University. On the other hand, 16 and 17-year-olds could be easily registered and introduced to voting by parents, schools, and other communities. They could accompany parents, teachers, or their friends to polling places. This social connection can make a real difference, according to research. Young adults who lived at home with their parents were more likely to vote than those living on their own. Voting while young can also establish a solid voting habit. People who vote in one election are more likely to vote in future elections, 25% more likely. So chances seem good that extending the vote to young citizens would eventually lead to increased voter turnout for all ages. Places that have lowered the voting age have proved this theory. When Tacoma Park first lowered the voting age to 16, the overall voter turnout was an abysmal 10%. The youth turnout blew that away, with 16-year-olds voting at 4 times that rate. In the next 2 elections, the overall voter turnout doubled to around 20%, while the youth vote reached 50%. 16-year-old Theo Shog says this about efforts to lower the voting age in Washington, D.C. Quote, "When you vote as a young person, that gets you in the mindset for voting later in life. That is something crucial that this nation needs." Who can lower the voting age? Efforts to lower the voting age have been locally or state focused. In 13 states and Washington, D.C., advocates can work directly with their towns or cities to lower the voting age for any type of election through something called a charter amendment. Basically, the local governing body has to amend the current rules to lower the voting age, and no other effort would be required. In other states, advocates need to either change state law or get approval from the state legislature. So the first step is finding out what level, state or local, to make the change and who has the power to implement it. Whether working for local or state level change, chances are good that advocates will need to educate the public and politicians and rally support. This might entail recruiting friends, neighbors, family members, and classmates, writing letters to the editor, making a website about the initiative and arguments supporting it, creating a social media campaign, gathering signatures for a petition, setting up meetings with school board members, town or city council members, or state legislatures, and preparing and giving speeches. Research, data, and passion can help convince people, but so can the equity principle. Is it fair to hold citizens age 16 and 17 to a higher standard than current voters? When the town council in Hyattsville, Maryland, considered lowering the local voting age to 16, one council member joked, "I'd like you to add an amendment for a clean your room precondition before you grant the franchise." Everyone laughed. But the measure passed without amendment. Perhaps the time has come to welcome the rest of the 8 million 16 and 17-year-olds fully into our democracy, whether their rooms are clean or not. You can learn more about those efforts, what you could do to lower the voting age in your town or city, and lots of other ways that we can improve our democracy to make it work better for everyone. And you call this democracy: How to Fix Our Government and Deliver Power to the People. Thanks for listening.